The mind-body problem. What is a mind? Welcome to my final philosophy project podcast. Today we're diving into one of the most complicated and fascinating questions humans have ever asked. What exactly is the mind? Is the mind something physical? Is it something non-physical? Is it just behavior? Is it an illusion? Is it something that artificial intelligence could ever have? This issue, known as the mind body problem, has been debated for over centuries, and philosophers still haven't reached a full agreement. But the good news is, we have some of the best thinkers in history helping us explore the topic today. I'll be using several readings from our coursebook Exploring Philosophy, which will be including works from Gilbert Ryle, Thomas Nagel, Frank Jackson, Alan Turing, and John Searle. The first half of this podcast will summarize those readings clearly and in detail. The second half will be my own philosophical evaluation, a creative and thoughtful argument that goes beyond the readings, but uses them as a foundation. So let's dive right into part 1. Gilbert Ryle, The Ghost in the Machine. Gilbert Ryle was reacting against a very traditional view of the mind that goes back to René Descartes. Descartes famously believed that the mind is a separate, non-physical substance, completely different from the body. It doesn't take up any space, it can't be measured, and it isn't physical in any way, but yet it somehow interacts with the body. Ryle calls this idea the official doctrine, but he also calls it a category mistake. Basically, a mistake in how we think about concepts. To explain what a category mistake is, Ryle gives us a great example. Imagine someone tours Oxford University. They see the library, the buildings, the classrooms, and the dorms. And then they say, "This is great, but where's the university?" The problem is that the university is not another building. It's the whole system of buildings, people, and activities. Ryle says dualists make the same mistake. They assume the mind is some separate thing inside the body, kind of like a ghost driving a machine. But Ryle argues that mental vocabulary like thinking, deciding, or intending does not refer to hidden inner objects. It refers to behavioral dispositions. So, in other words, your mind is not a ghost. Your mind is how you act, how you respond, and how you behave. Ryle didn't deny that we have inner experiences, but he thought those experiences were not separate spiritual substances. They were part of how we live. Ryle's view is called behaviorism, and it's an attempt to remove all the mystery from the mind. Moving on to Thomas Nagel. What is it like to be a bat? Thomas Nagel strongly disagrees with Ryle's behaviorist approach. Nagel argues that any theory of the mind that ignores subjective experience is missing the entire point. Subjective experience is what philosophers call phenomenology, the "what is it like" quality of consciousness. There is something there is something it is like to see the color red. There is something it is like to taste chocolate. And there is something it is like to be you. Nagel uses the example of a bat. Bat uses echolocation to experience their environment, a totally alien form of perception. We can study this scientifically, we can map out the bat brain, and we can understand the physics of sonar. But Nagel says, even if we learned every single physical fact about bats, we still wouldn't know what it feels like to be a bat. So, this means subjective experience cannot be reduced to physical or behavioral facts. Nagel isn't doing dualism. He isn't saying the mind is a soul or a ghost. What he's saying is that physical science does not explain consciousness, at least not yet. Consciousness has a first-person perspective, and science currently works in the third person. Nagel's essay is a powerful reminder that the inner aspect of the mind, what it feels like, is real. Moving on to Frank Jackson, the qualia problem, Mary the color scientist. Frank Jackson adds another argument in favor of subjectivity with his famous thought experiment about Mary. Mary is a brilliant color scientist who knows absolutely everything about vision, physics, biology, neuroscience, but there's one catch. She has lived her whole life in a black and white room, and she has never seen color. Then, one day, Mary steps outside the room and sees red for the first time. Even though she knew all the physical information about color, she still learned something new. The actual experience of seeing red. Jackson says this proves that not all facts are physical facts. There are facts about qualia, subjective experiences, that physical science cannot capture. Mary's story doesn't just challenge physicalism. It shows that subjective consciousness contains knowledge that is not reducible to physical information. Alan Turing, Computing Machinery and Intelligence. Alan Turing approaches the mind from a very different angle, artificial intelligence. Instead of asking whether machines can really think, Turing replaces that question with something practical. The Turing test. If a machine can converse so well that a human cannot tell whether they're talking to a machine or a person, then the machine should be considered intelligent. Turing argues that intelligence is not tied to biology. You don't need a soul or any special substance to be able to think. Thought is about structure and function. He also responds to objections like machines can't be creative, machines can't make mistakes, machines can't have any emotions. Turing believes many of these objections are based on intuition, not any clear evidence. His view suggests machines could one day think, not magically, but through computational structures. Moving on to John Searle, Do Computers Think? John Searle disagrees completely with Turing, and his famous Chinese room argument shows exactly why. So, imagine yourself, you're locked in a room with a giant rulebook that tells you how to manipulate Chinese symbols. But you don't understand Chinese at all. But by following the rules, you produce correct answers to Chinese questions. From the outside, it looks like you understand Chinese, but from the inside, you understand nothing. And Searle says computers work the exact same way. They manipulate symbols using rules, but they have no understanding, no meaning, or no consciousness. For Searle, computation is not consciousness. A perfect simulation of understanding is still not real understanding. Searle thinks the brain has special biological powers that create consciousness, powers that software alone cannot reproduce. So this was everything for part 1, and now we're gonna be moving on to part 2, which is gonna be an evaluation of the things that I brought up. So welcome back to the part 2, which will be a evaluation. The mind has two sides and both are real. When we step back from the readings, we notice something important. Every philosopher is trying to protect one side of the mind, but none of them can capture the whole thing alone. On one hand, we have the physical and functional public side of the mind, the part that reveals itself in behavior, language, and problem solving. This is the side that Ryle and Turing defend. Ryle reminds us that intelligence shows up in how we act, and Turing shows that intelligence can exist in systems other than humans. This is the outward, measurable mind. But there is also the subjective, private, first person side. The side that only you can feel. This is where Nagel and Jackson steps in. Nagel's bad example proves that consciousness has a unique "what is it like" quality that no objective description captures. And Jackson's Mary demonstrates that experience adds new knowledge beyond physical facts. Together, these views show that the mind has two dimensions, one we can observe and one we can only experience. A complete theory has to explain both, not just one. Why dualism doesn't work? Dualism, the idea that mind and body are separate, tries to protect the inner world that Nagel and Jackson describes, but it collapses under its own weight. If the mind is a non-physical thing, how does it interact with neurons, hormones, and muscles? How can a thought, which has no mass or energy, make my hand lift a glass? This interaction problem isn't a small detail, it's a fatal flaw. Ryle's critique is powerful here. He argues that dualists commit a category mistake, treating the mind like a ghostly thing that lives inside our body. But Ryle goes too far by collapsing mental life entirely into behavior. Dualism fails because it tries to save consciousness by disconnecting it from science. But behaviorism fails because it tries to save science by ignoring consciousness. So we need a middle path. Why behaviorism isn't enough? Behaviorism claims that the mind is nothing more than behavior. This sounds neat and simple. If we can explain what someone does, we don't need to explain what they feel. But Nagel and Jackson destroy this idea from the two different angles. Nagel says, even if you map every detail of a bat's brain and behavior, you still don't know what it feels like to be a bat. And Jackson says, even if Mary knows all physical facts about color, she learns something new the moment she experiences red. These examples show that inner experience, qualia, is real. Two beings could behave identically, yet differ completely in their conscious lives. This means behavior is evidence of the mind, but not the full story of the mind. Why Turing is right about intelligence. Turing's genius is to separate intelligence from biological origin. He argues that intelligence is not something humans are, it's something systems do. And we see this every day today. AI beats world champions in chess, Go, and strategy games. AI writes, composes music, analyzes data, tutors students, and designs molecules. Turing predicted this long before computing power existed. His test, the imitation game, shifts focus from internal essence to outward capability. If behavior matches, intelligence is present, no matter the material. But Turing also leaves room for mystery. He doesn't say machines must be conscious, only that they can be intelligent in a functional sense. And in 2025, we live in the world that Turing predicted. Why Searle is right about consciousness. Searle agrees with Turing that machines can simulate intelligence, but he argues that simulation is not understanding. His Chinese room example shows the difference. A person could follow rules to output Chinese sentences without knowing a single word of Chinese. The behavior matches, but the understanding is missing. This is exactly what current AI systems do. They manipulate symbols based on patterns, but they don't experience the meaning. Searle's key point: syntax is not semantics. A system can process symbols without having a mind. But Searle's biological limitation, the claim that consciousness requires a brain made of neurons, is not proven. We don't know what kind of physical systems might generate consciousness. In this sense, Searle shows us what consciousness is not, but doesn't fully explain what it is. My position, non-reductive physicalism. My view takes the strengths of each philosopher and rejects their weakness. I call it non-reductive physicalism. The idea that the mind is fully produced by the physical brain, but consciousness cannot be reduced to physical descriptions. Mental states have emergent properties that arise from complex organizations. Experience is real and irreducible. You cannot explain the mind by looking only at behavior or only at computation or only at neurons. And this view respects Ryle's insight that behavior matters, Turing's insight that intelligence is functional, Nagel's insight that consciousness is subjective, Jason's insight that experience adds knowledge, Searle's insight that understanding is not mere symbol manipulation. Non-reductive physicalism is not a compromise, it's a synthesis. It captures the richness of the mind without reducing it to one simplistic ingredient. What does this mean for artificial intelligence? Could AI ever be conscious? Possibly, but not by scaling up the systems we have today. All current AI is like Searle's Chinese room. It processes inputs and outputs, but has no inner point of view. So, for true machine consciousness, we would need the following: a new physical architecture, a dynamic self-organizing systems, the right kind of integration and complexity, maybe even an emotional or sensomotor grounding in the world. We are nowhere near that today. But in theory, a non-biological system could have consciousness if it had the right kind of physical organization. Consciousness is not magic. It is an emergent property of matter, just not of any matter arranged any way. So, my final thoughts. The mind-body problem reveals how much we still don't know, but also how much we've already discovered. Ryle shows us what the mind is not. Nagel and Jackson show us what the mind has. Turing shows us what the minds can do, and Searle shows us what minds mean. So, put together, these ideas point to a vision of the mind that honors both science and experience. A vision where the mind is not a ghost, not a behavior, not a computer program, but a living, emergent phenomenon grounded in the physical world yet irreducible to it. And that makes humanity, consciousness, and our future with AI more mysterious and more fascinating than ever. So, thank you so much for listening to this extended exploration of the mind-body problem. I hope this helped illuminate how philosophy continues to shape our understanding of ourselves, our consciousness, and possibly our future with intelligence machine. Thank you.